Okay, fantastic. So if you've just joined us on Facebook or if you're watching the recording, hello and welcome. And I'm here with Chiara Bruzzano, who is talking about how can we make engaging listening activities with technology. This is such an interesting topic. How are you today, Chiara?
Yes, I'm well. Yeah, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you, Joe.
We're really pleased to see you. Um, So I'll tell you a little bit about Chiara before I hand over. So she is an ELT researcher and teacher trainer. So after gaining her PhD at the University of Leeds, she started working in teacher training. She's an MA TESOL tutor at the University of Leeds and at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. She also works on a research project for the British Council on access to higher education for forced migrants. Chiara blogs for the journal Modern English Teacher, and you may know her from the popular Language Ed newsletter, and we'll share all the relevant links to those things during the session. So Chiara, we're delighted to have you. Welcome. Where are you joining us from today?
Thank you, Joe. I'm actually joining you from Leeds,
Yes.
in Yorkshire,
Ah,
where it's unusually sunny. So
wow.
there you go.
Sunny in you brought sunshine from the north of England.
So I did,
It's
yes.
almost impossible to do that. All right, well, enjoy the session. I'll turn my camera off. I'm here if you need me, and we'll see you later on.
Thank you so much, Joe. So let me share my screen now. Okay. Can you just confirm if you can see my screen?
Yep, that's
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah.
lovely. Okay, thank you so much, Joe, for that introduction, and thanks everybody for joining me today. I am so delighted to be here and to be able to have this opportunity really to share with you what I've learned about listening, which is a topic that's very close to my heart and a topic on which I've been doing research for a decade now. So the topic of today's session is how can we make engaging listening activities with technology? And we're going to have three main sections in our webinar. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the research behind listening comprehension. I will then ask you to evaluate a listening activity, kind of a typical listening activity, and what the main issues with it might be. And then we're going to talk about a number of tools, of digital tools that you can use to make engaging listening activities. This is going to be the bulk of my session, the biggest part of my session, in which I'll tell you about all three accessible and easy to use tools that you can use to enhance your listening activities. So starting a little bit from the research about listening, when you read about listening pedagogy, how we teach and how we develop listening, you will come across time and time again two very famous labels. The first one is the Cinderella skill. So listening has been defined very, very often as the Cinderella skill, the Cinderella of the four skills. And then when we talk about how we teach listening, a label that's been used very frequently in the past 2 decades is the comprehension approach, which describes the approach that is typically used to teach listening and that is very comprehension based. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do in the chat now, just for a few moments, is can you tell me what you think these two labels mean? Have you ever come across them? And can you tell me what you think they mean? And I'm just going to read through your comments. Okay, so Isabel is starting already with a good observation. Cinderella, the neglected skill, the underrated skill, perhaps. Yeah. And neglected compared to what, of course. the unattended skill. Okay, some people are saying that it's the first time they've heard these things. Okay, which is absolutely fine. That's why I'm here, really. Cinderella neglected compared to the other macro skills. Okay, comprehension approach might be the most obvious skill to lead to comprehension, and that's something that we're going to discuss. The underdog, I like this. Menka is saying the Cinderella skill is the underdog among skills. Let's start with this then. So listening has been described very famously as the Cinderella skill in second language learning, because all too often it has been overlooked by its elder sister speaking. And so this is a claim that has been made so many times, that we don't teach listening as much as we should, that we don't research listening as much as we should. And so I decided to look into this actually, because is this really the Cinderella skill, would you say? Is listening less important than the other skills? And is listening less researched than the other skills? And so I looked at results, how often has listening been researched compared to the other three skills. And when we look at the all-time results, so spanning back, decades, yes, we can see that definitely listening has been the Cinderella skill. Historically, if you look at this bar chart, it's got only a bit less than, only a bit more than half the results that writing has. However, when we look at more recent research, so the last decade, we see that the gap is narrowing. This is very encouraging, actually, because we do need to know a little bit more about what listening is, how it works, and especially as teachers, what we can do to help our learners develop it. Okay. And so what does all of this research tell us? The very basics really is that we're going to start from is how does listening work? And the research has told us how listening works when we listen in a second language. This is obviously a simplification of a model, but you have to bear in mind two directions in which we listen. The first one is bottom up, from the bottom up. And this is called bottom-up decoding. And what it means is essentially we listen to the building blocks of an utterance, starting from the sounds, going up to the syllables, and then we make sense of the words, phrases, and then sentences. And that's how we get the literal meaning of what we're listening to. Simultaneously, we also have to build the meaning of what we're listening to in a top-down fashion, which means that we draw on our knowledge of the world, of the speaker, and of what has been said before to interpret that literal meaning that we got from bottom-up decoding. Now, these two directions, these two processes happen simultaneously. They happen all the time, which of course means that something can go wrong at any point. And something does go wrong very often, as we know. And it's important, this is one of the points I'll be making today, that it's important that we identify when things go wrong. And to illustrate this, I will show you some results from a research study that was done a few years ago, in which intermediate students of a second language were asked to listen to an audio, and then the audio was paused every few seconds, and the students were asked to transcribe the last 4 words that they'd heard. Look at what happened. So here's an example. In the original version, the audio said, "I'd like to tell you about a study that was done." What did the students hear? The students heard, "Stay it with down," instead of "study that was done." What happened here? Well, what's likely to have happened is, of course, a bottom-up issue in which the student weren't able to understand where one word ended and the next word began. That's called word segmentation, and so they got it wrong. There was a breakdown in listening comprehension. But breakdowns can happen in a top-down fashion as well. So if we look at this example, the original version of a text, which was called Our Relationship with Food. And a section of this audio said, food is shipped in from larger distances. And what did the students hear? Food get different relationship. Now, the word relationship wasn't even in the audio. So this was very likely a top-down fabrication. So the students thought that they knew what was coming and they knew about the topic because they knew the title. And so they interpreted the meaning based on their, I'm going to call them preconceptions, because this is something that emerged in the pre-webinar survey that some of you kindly did for us. That students go into a listening with their idea what's going to come up, and then they don't revise their hypotheses based on the actual sounds and words that they hear. So a lot can go wrong with listening, I think it's fair to say, but we also have the opportunity to support our learners in developing these processes. And develop their listening. We can go from a beginner listener who's very much dependent on the sounds and the words, and I think you can relate to this experience if you think about listening in a language that you're not very proficient in. You're kind of hanging on little sounds and whatever word you can grasp, right? And then as listeners progress, they become proficient, and so the processing becomes more automatic, less cognitively demanding, less stressful, and of course, much more similar to the way that we listen in our first language. Okay. So with this being the case, and this being the way that we develop our listening, what do you think? Can we teach our students how to develop our listening? And I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment so that I can read your answers in the chat. Can we teach our students how to develop their listening? And if so, how? Some people are saying, yes, of course. Miranda, yes, of course. Sure. Very good. Bianca is saying, tell them the listening goal beforehand. Okay, we're going to talk about purposes for listening today as well. Okay, there's a lot of agreement. I can see. Yes, we can. We are very good. Indrajit is saying, yes, we can acquaint them with listening strategies. That's a good one. Nobody's saying no, which is good. I don't think we can, teach them in kind of a directive way. Of course, now you're going to develop your listening. However, I do agree with everybody that we can support them both with practice, but also with actual development and targeted exercises, which we're going to talk about today. Targeted exercises to develop those listening processes, and also that metacognition, which assists listening. So I'm glad to see that there is agreement overall on this one. Now, the research has looked at how teachers teach listening, and I'm going to tell you a bit about what it has found. And I'd like you to tell me in the chat if you can relate to any or more, perhaps one or more of the approaches that I'm going to tell you about. So the first one is this so-called comprehension approach. So this goes back to John Field and others, who are very important researchers in the field of listening, and they have looked at how listening is taught typically, and how very often commercial published materials deal with listening. And they noticed a pattern that goes like this. Students listen, they answer comprehension questions, Then the teacher checks the answers to the comprehension question and then move on. This is, again, an oversimplification of a more complex issue, but essentially the point is that there have been claims in the literature about listening that this approach focuses too much on testing listening and not enough on teaching listening. What does this mean? This means that by doing this, by simply, asking students to answer comprehension questions and then checking their answers and then moving on, you don't focus on the difficulties that they've had. You don't focus on why those difficulties arose, and you don't focus on how those difficulties can be tackled in the future. And also you are continuously sort of testing their existing ability, in a sense, and not developing those processes that we talked about. So this is one of the approaches that it is claimed that is very common. However, there are also other approaches that have been observed by different researchers and that I argue might be contextually appropriate approaches. The first one is listening as task completion. So Suzanne Graham and Danielle Santos did this research a few years ago, and they found that teachers thought of listening as completing a task. And then obviously this has implications for washback, because you always have to be dealing with, listening exams. In my context, in Italy, for example, there are pretty famous standardized listening exams that might influence the way that you conceive of listening and the way that you do listening. Listening to learn English. This is one that I observed in my research, especially in schools. So you do listening to then develop other skills. So you do a listening and then use it as a springboard for a writing activity or for a speaking activity, or to learn grammar, to learn vocabulary. This one I found particularly interesting in my research in a high school. Listening was conceived of by many teachers as simply a part of an interdisciplinary educational approach. So listening was just sort of a cog in a machine that was meant to convey content, that was meant to develop critical thinking, and so it was used for those purposes mainly. And then finally, we have what some have called listening by osmosis, which relates technically to extensive listening, which means listening to very large quantities of input for pleasure. And it's also something that can help students, okay? So can you relate to any of these approaches? Think about it in your head. My point today is that I'm not going to give you any prescriptions for sort of how you have to teach listening, because my argument really is that you know your context best, and so you know what kind of constraints you have to reckon with, what exams, what policies, and the parents and the students, so you know your context. What I'm going to do today is give you suggestions for how you can incorporate new tools and new approaches into your existing approach and into your kind of existing purposes for listening, the way that you see listening. What is your main difficulty when teaching listening? I'm going to stop sharing for 30 seconds or so you can tell me in the chat. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so Zena is talking about the accent. Interesting. Again, Getanjali is talking about environmental conditions. Okay, interesting, like noise, I suppose. Accents, distractions, a lack of vocabulary, very important. Distractions, concentration, very, very good. Speed, Students' motivation, engagement, okay. Okay, and now things are starting to repeat themselves, okay. So these are very much the issues that have that emerged in the pre-webinar survey, and I'm going to share the results now. So what do you teachers think about listening? We have research about this. Many teachers are dissatisfied with their practices, but they lack the time and expertise to find alternatives. Teachers are in tune with their learners' difficulties, like many of you are, like decoding problems, for example. But again, the lack of time and knowledge may prevent innovation. From the pre-webinar survey, 1/3 of respondents rated teaching listening as quite difficult. The main difficulties that emerged are very similar to what has come up today. So in terms of learners' attention, motivation, engagement, having learners with mixed abilities. And then in terms of the listening itself, accents, speed tend to be quite important. And I'm glad to say that we'll be dealing with these today. So we will be talking explicitly about how to make activities more engaging, and of course, three main things really: how to make activities more engaging, how to differentiate, how to use technology to differentiate those activities so that you can indeed cater for mixed abilities and mixed and sort of different interests in the students, but also how to deal with difficulties such as speed and accents. What do learners think about listening? And I'm gonna, while I tell you what the research tells us, I'd like to hear from you. What do your learners think about listening? Have you ever asked them, perhaps? Have they ever told you? We do have not quite a bit. We have some research about listening, and a lot of you are saying, oh, it's not important. They find it too hard. They find it too boring. They hate it, basically. Okay. Yes and no. So the results vary in the research, but one thing that has come up very much in my research, and this piece of research I did in a high school with kids 15 to 17 years old. They talked at length about the unpredictability and uncontrollability of listening. And this is very useful to know because it goes beyond just, oh, teacher, it was too difficult. Yes, but why was it too difficult? They feel that listening is unpredictable. They feel that they can't control it. With a reading, you can stop, you can go back, you can take your time. But with the listening, you can't do that. And this is Enrico, this is a quote that I think exemplifies this from Enrico, one of my participants. I said, for all I knew, it could have been a listening on crocodiles or whatever. This feeling that you are prey to the listening, to the teacher's decisions, that you can't do much about it. And they also talked about the difference between real English and school English and how they struggled with that. And real English was much more challenging than sort of the more polished English that they heard in school. That's typical very often of published materials. So what's the bottom line? Bottom line is teachers, I think, need tools to develop listening processes, yes, in a way that's compatible with their context and with their purposes for listening. And learners need the tools to feel more in control of their listening, whatever the circumstances, because, of course, feeling that listening is completely out of your control generates feelings of anxiety, which take a lot of cognitive attention, so to call it, away from the actual listening task. So let's look at a typical listening activity now. Have a look at this quite quickly, I'd say. And can you tell me in the chat, what do you think are some issues with this activity? It's a bit of a typical gap fill. Okay. Ah, very good. Water is saying not enough time between gaps. That's a good one. I hadn't thought of that. It could be. It depends how quickly, I think. It's easy to guess is saying Tugba. Very good. Yeah. Huang is saying it misses the pre-listening activity. There's no kind of activity introduced in it. Zaina is saying the activity itself seems to be simple. It's easy to guess. Yes, absolutely. Okay, the sentences are long and they're not numbered. Okay, that's a good point, I suppose. Very good. They need many times to listen before answering. Okay, yes, I mean, I was going to make that point myself. So, first of all, of a procedural nature, the number of times that the students should listen is not specified. Second of all, the students don't really need to listen to the audio. They can make guesses, really, because this script provides so much of the background that the students need. So they don't need to activate that top-down knowledge. They don't really need to listen quite as much. And this goes back to the issue of giving the students a purpose for listening. There's no focus on building bottom-up listening skills. There's no explicit focus on this, which is very important and lacking in published materials sometimes. And we will see how we can cater for that. There is a post-listening phase, but is it engaging? Is it productive? Not really. It doesn't really help learn English, grammar, vocabulary, or other skills. Doesn't help develop critical thinking, or it doesn't take that very important opportunity to go back to what the students struggled with. What were your difficulties? And how can we tackle them? There's no differentiation. The activity seems to be the same for all the students. And some of you have said this, the activity is not especially engaging. So how do we solve this? How do we make listening activities more engaging? I'm going to show you a number of first of all, free. All of the tools I'm going to show you are free and easy to use tools. And I think the most ubiquitous of all is YouTube. So let's start by looking at some of the features in YouTube that are there for a reason. And for me, anyway, the reason is that we can use them, we can harness them to their full potential. And I'm going to start with one that students use all the time on their devices anyways, which are captions. And I quite like captions because it's something that I use to make students feel more responsible for their learning. So they can activate them and deactivate them whenever they feel that they're struggling, and this helps them get more in tune with their listening difficulties, become more aware of what they're doing. It's also something that they do anyways. They do this at home. There's no way to prevent them from doing this on social media and on Netflix and whatnot. So it's very realistic for them. Another exercise I like doing with them is activate the subtitles, and when they're automated subtitles on YouTube, find the mistakes. And this is quite engaging because they quite like finding mistakes. Another one is that you can slow down the speed of a YouTube video, and you can let your students play with this so they become, again, more autonomous, or you can play with this yourself and kind of show a video or play an audio at different speeds. And it also challenges, I think, a little bit that perception that, oh, it's always too fast. They always speak too fast. If only they spoke more slowly. In fact, research has given contrasting results on this. Yes, some research has shown that slower audios lead to better listening performance, but other research actually has shown that even slowing down an audio doesn't really necessarily help, or isn't actually preferred by listeners. So this is a good opportunity using a very simple tool that we all use anyways to challenge this assumption in students and to see what if their listening gets better or not with slower speed. Also, when it comes to YouTube, you can use another tool that's called Language Reactor. Language Reactor is a Google Chrome extension that works both on YouTube and on Netflix. And it's very customized free. All of these tools are free. And it's very customizable. And I'm going to show you how it works here in a little video. So you've got this, you can turn it on or off very easily. You can see the transcript on the right-hand side.
Difficult skills to improve through real-life situations is listening.
And
Situations.
And you can click on words, and here I've activated the Italian dictionary, so you can see translations, definitions, examples of words, and the video will stop automatically when you click. You can go...
One of the most difficult skills to improve through real-life situations is listening. But have no fear. You can target your learning to make...
You can repeat a certain section, you can go to the previous or next subtitles, and then you've got loads of settings that you can change. You can show 1 or 2 languages as well simultaneously. You can show a mini dictionary, you can change the font for accessibility. So there's loads that you can do, and it helps you differentiate listening, because inevitably your learners will have different preferences and of course different levels as well. Another thing that I want to talk about is difficulties. And I know that sometimes the last thing we want to do is talk about what's difficult. It's very draining, I get that. But it's very important that students get a sense of what their difficulties were, that they familiarize themselves with what difficulties they have and why they have them, so that they can strategize on what to do the next time they have difficulties. And indeed, this is important to help them gain that sense of control over their listening. I've struggled with this. Why did I struggle? What happened? And what can I do the next time this happens? And one way I would suggest that you can help them with this is by having them bookmark key moments. You can use this tool by yourself, of course, or they can use it as well on their devices, whereby you download, again, it's a Google Chrome extension called Bookmarker for YouTube. And this is the way that it works. Let's say we're listening to this video, we're watching this video again.
One of the most difficult skills to improve through real-life situations is listening. But have no fear. You can target your learning to make it a breeze.
Okay. Now I've got this transcript here on the side. Normally you wouldn't have this transcript here on the side if you are asking your learners to watch without subtitles. So I've listened here, and now I've got a doubt. What did she just say? I don't know what she said. And what I can do is I can bookmark this. So you see, I add a bookmark very simply. And then I open the extension Bookmarker for YouTube. And I can see that there's a bookmark at minute 0, second 10, and I can make my hypotheses. What did she say? Breathe, breeze, bees. What did she say? So this is an activity that I have students do instead of having them watch with the purpose of answering comprehension questions, for example. Yes, there's scope for that, but there's also scope for having them listen, trying to understand, and pinpoint difficulties. So that's your purpose for this particular activity. Find some key moments where you struggled, make some hypotheses about what she said, and bookmark them, and then we'll discuss them together. This kind of forces them as well to develop their bottom-up listening. Another one that you may already use is the YouTube transcript, which is interactive. You can click on any bits of the captions and it will replay.
One of the most difficult skills to improve through real life, if you know you're going into a situation where English is spoken.
See, you can click on different bits of the transcript and it will replay that part of the video. You can toggle the timestamps. Sometimes I do this because then I copy and paste the transcript. And I can copy onto a document and print it for the students or send it to the students. I can also put the timestamps back in if I find them helpful. And it's searchable, by the way, the transcript, the YouTube transcript. So, for example, I want to go back to that breeze thing. What was the context for that? I just search it in the transcript. The transcript is quite important. There are a lot of reasons that I'm going to tell you about. If you don't fancy doing this whole business of copying and pasting it, there's various websites you can use where you can just copy and paste the link of a YouTube video, and you can then copy or even download the transcript. An example is tactic.io. You put in the just a URL, the link of your video, and you'll get a copy function or a download function. So there you go, you get your transcript straight away. Why do we need the transcript? Loads of reasons. If you want to tell me in the chat how you use the transcript, if you use it. To check comprehension would be the most obvious one. But I think it's quite important, to be honest, because yes, students can answer comprehension questions or do tasks, but it's only by looking at the transcript that they can see the real gap between their comprehension and what the text actually said. To identify misunderstandings would be the next logical step. To learn new vocabulary, I quite like doing this because it can be very easy to differentiate this activity, you know. Look at the transcript and notice any misunderstandings. Let's talk about those. But then also find 2 items of vocabulary that you liked, that you want to remember for the future. And the last one, to find chunks for intensive bottom-up practice. What does this mean? You can look at the transcript before the lesson, well, during the lesson, but before the lesson as well. And you may find, especially if it's an authentic video, that there's loads of little chunks. So they're called word clusters typically. So chunks of 2, 3, 4 words that are said a lot. And there's research on this, like Carter and McCarthy, that's frequently cited, that has found the most frequent chunks in spoken English. Things like, it was, you know, I don't know, I mean, a lot of. And the thing about these clusters is that they're not pronounced in their full, in kind of a full way, a lot of. They're very often pronounced in a reduced way. And so a lot of becomes a lot of. What that means is that students will struggle to hear them, they'll struggle to make sense of them, and because they're so frequent, they really do hinder comprehension by the end of, I don't know, a 4 minutes listening. So that's a rationale for choosing these chunks, these word clusters, and then using them to your advantage to create short, intensive exercises. And what do I mean by that? There are tools like Youglish. Does anybody know Youglish? If so, can you tell me in the chat? Youglish is a database of authentic videos that you can search just like you would on Google, yeah? So you put in a phrase, and here, to honor my hosts, I chose to look up British Council. And it will bring up hundreds, sometimes thousands of videos in which that phrase is included. And you can play them to show your learners how these phrases are actually pronounced. And this is very useful because then they get to understand how they are pronounced, and they have a more realistic expectation of how they are pronounced. And they learn to be less caught out when they are listening to these. So even just British Council, somebody might say British Council. Even I today have said British Council and then British Council, and somebody else might say British Council. So you can, of course, also use this for pronunciation purposes. Why not? You can focus on a short extract for intensive bottom-up decoding practice, and you can do this with a little transcription exercise. So if you think that there are short extracts, and I'm talking a few seconds, 4, 5, no more than 10 seconds, that may be interesting for your learners to hear, you play them repeatedly and ask your learners to transcribe all the words that they hear. And that is the perfect, really bottom-up decoding practice. And how can you do this? Let's say that I've got a YouTube, apologies. Let's say that I've got a YouTube video. I find an interesting, I don't know, 5 seconds that I want to play for my learners. I go share and then start at, and it will generate a link to the YouTube video that starts exactly at that particular that specific second. Yeah, so then you can play it and replay it, and and that's how you do intensive bottom-up practice. Another way, if you've got an audio file, is you can cut a little bit of it and then play it again and again using software like Audacity, which is free open software. The last few things I'm going to tell you about are, first of all, about making listening into a game. And the first tool I think the main tool to do this is lyrics training. I love lyrics training. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but it's, again, a database of searchable songs. So loads of scope here for personalization of activities. Students play a game which, however, forces them really to listen to develop their bottom-up decoding. And I do this a lot for homework. So you see, they listen, they see the captions, and they have to fill them in with the right word. And it's all authentic, of course. But the feature I like the most is, again, tied to the transcript. So as you can see, there's a transcript function in lyrics training where you can create your own gap fill by simply clicking on the words that you want to gap. And here I've chosen it, I've chosen if, and I've chosen with. Because very often I find that these little grammar words are difficult to hear. So instead of doing the traditional gap fill with content words, I do gap fills that focus on these little words that are pronounced in a reduced form. It's challenging as well for students. I give this a lot for homework. You can also use listening, of course, to learn English, and you can use TubeQuizlet, another free website, excellent, that you can use and it's searchable by separate level, by categories or by topic, by English variety, but especially by type. So what's your purpose? Are you wanting to explore grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary, spelling? And you will get videos like this and a gap fill with, in this case, a grammar focus. And the cool thing about this is that you can get the same video with different exercises associated to it. You get the same video, for example, in a grammar focus, a vocabulary focus, and then a pronunciation focus. And you don't have to write any of these exercises, they're ready-made. They're very engaging because you get loads of authentic videos, and they are you can search them by separate level, so you know that you'll find something that suits your learners. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about, and then that's it, is the need, I would say it's a need, to develop metacognition. We talked before about the feeling that many learners have that listening is unpredictable, it's uncontrollable, I can't do anything about it. I feel prey to the audio, the accent, the speaker, or whatever the teacher decides to do today. Is it about crocodiles? I don't know. I like to think that we can work on this to turn it into a more positive approach to listening, a feeling that we can actually control some of what we do with metacognition, the ability to plan, monitor, and evaluate our listening. And a way to do this is by doing short reflection exercises after a listening activity. And you can use even something simple like Google Forms for this. I've done a reflection sheet based on the work of John Field and others, in which, for example, I asked them to rate how difficult listening was today. So that also helps them keep track of their progress if you do this repeatedly. What was the most difficult thing about listening for you today? Again, helps them keep track and analyze their difficulties critically and see what the patterns are, what they need to focus on the most. I've done this in the first language of the students as well. It doesn't need to be in English. Look at the transcript. What are some words you didn't recognize but recognized after listening several times? What are some words you found difficult to recognize even when you had the transcript? Helps them see the difference between these two. Now look at one of the words you found difficult. Why did you find it difficult? And that way they start seeing that listening is actually something they can manipulate. And the next time you do a listening exercise, what is one thing you could do to improve your comprehension? So this sort of planning, I have some control over this. I have some strategies that I'll discuss with my teachers and my peers about what I'll do the next time. That's it for me. I have come to the end of my session. Here are my references if you are interested in following up on any of the work that I've reviewed. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on LinkedIn or on Facebook via my company profile, LanguageEd, or you can shoot me an email if you have any questions about what I've discussed today. And I think I'm going to stop sharing.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Chiara. Thank you so much. That was so interesting. And so practical as well. You shared so many tools, and I love the way you really break it down into the little elements of listening, what can cause problems, helping students identify exactly the part of the text, or was it a word, was it connected speech? That's really great. Thank you. I loved all of that. We've got lots of questions. I could tell people were really listening intently and concentrating through a lot of that, but we've had a flurry of questions in at the end as well. Actually, one thing before we continue, could you recap? You mentioned that listening is often called the Cinderella skill, and some people miss the definition of that. Could you explain? What exactly do we mean, the Cinderella skill?
It means that it's traditionally been overlooked and neglected. I'd say claims have been made in this sense, both in terms of how much we teach it and how well we teach it, and also in terms of how much it's being researched. There's less research on listening than there is on other skills.
Right. Okay. So like the character Cinderella in the fairy tale,
very good.
The sister that is neglected, that needs more attention.
Exactly.
And like the big sister speaking or reading gets all the attention.
Yes.
Okay. So it's this poor neglected skill that we want to pay attention to.
Yes.
And that leads us to, I love this question from Mohammed on Facebook. He says, how can we make listening lovable?
I think it's a complex question in the sense that I don't know if you've noticed in the comments, but loads of people were talking about the association between listening and testing. And that makes it very much not lovable. So I think it's a question that needs to be treated carefully from a contextual perspective, because there are some contexts where you cannot do very much about it if it's a context that's very prescriptive with loads of testing emphasis and loads of washback. If you're not in a context like that, I think to make it lovable, you want to differentiate as much as possible, and you want to personalize as much as possible. And so tap into the learner's interests, because that's the reality of it. I find even my students who wouldn't really call themselves good at English or passionate about English end up being exposed to spoken English so much anyway through music and social media. So it's just about finding that, and they don't even realize it very often, and that's the thing about it as well. So making them realize that would be a starting point, I think, how much that can help them. And another thing I always say, don't be scared to use captions. I'm sorry, I know that this is, maybe we'll talk about this in the Q&A that we have coming up next week, but captions can be a great way to introduce videos that would normally be a bit too difficult for your learners, but maybe they're just what they need, interest-wise.
Yeah. So a lot of what you've mentioned today is how to make it not just like a test every time you do a listening activity in class, but how to give learners tools, how to support them, the scaffolding, like you say, subtitles as well could be useful. Okay, I love it. And then because it is very stressful, it's very frustrating listening to something and not understanding.
Oh yeah.
You don't even know why. Why didn't I understand? So I like the ideas you introduced to understand why as well.
Yeah, I think that's quite important, because and very often, and we'd need another session to talk about this, but there is a gap between what the learners think that the main difficulties are and what they actually are.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? Because they often think the culprit is, it's just too fast. English people speak too fast. Well, I think you'll find each English person speaks differently,
Right.
So it's a case of helping them understand really the variety of difficulties that they can actually have, so it doesn't feel so uncontrollable.
Yeah, exactly. And I know as a learner, it is quite comforting if the answer to that, why didn't I understand, is just like, well, I didn't know that word. And now I've learned a new key word.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Increase my vocabulary and I understand more.
Absolutely. And it's sometimes as well when they say it's too fast, sometimes it is too fast, I'm not going to lie. And if you counted the sort of objective way, the words per minute, so to speak, or the syllables or whatever, yes, it would be classed perhaps as too fast. However, often it's the way that things are pronounced and connected speech. So yes, I didn't get that. Was it because of the way it was pronounced perhaps, and not just it was too fast, or the accent or whatever?
Yeah, definitely. Which is why, working on pronunciation also helps with listening. So there's a question related to that, actually. Somebody mentioned the Gboard's speech to text feature that you can use on a mobile phone. If you speak into it and it writes it as text. So that's not actually a listening activity, but do you think that could help?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, yes, in the sense that I've done this I've done this when I was speaking, and sort of it's interesting sort of if you've got like an interactive whiteboard and you can speak into a microphone, and then the kids see what's happening and what is being transcribed, and then they have to identify the mistakes, or they can look at how the sort of the hypotheses that the machine is making change as you speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that's quite an interesting listening activity.
That is interesting. So the way it will predict what's coming.
And revise. Kind of. I've done this with with Microsoft tools, but I suspect it's going to be very similar to perhaps Google tools. I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's lots of different things you can do that with. Yeah. Okay, so we have a question from Kishwa, who says, please explain customized listening. You mentioned
Did I?
customized listening, I think, or we can customize things. Was that the idea of adapting things for students, giving them the tools?
Possibly. I don't think I talked about customized, like it doesn't ring a bell per se, but maybe we can get if anybody remembers this. No, but for sure, I mean, listening, we like to think that we can make it into kind of a collaborative activity. And yes, I do think you can do that, you know, with things like the dictogloss, for example. Yes, but essentially a big part of listening is and remains an individual activity because it gets processed in the brain. And so there are things that are going to happen differently in each individual student. And so giving them those tools that they can take responsibility for and use kind of autonomously as well differentiates their listening. I don't think it's something we can avoid doing.
No. So I really like the idea, the way that you put technology in learners' hands so that they themselves can control. Azim is asking if you could give more details about the use of technology for mixed ability learning.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Like because I do realize that most people don't have the luxury of having small classes, for example, you know, with those 10 students and whatever. Some of us have bigger classes, and I think giving them those little tools, even if they're not necessarily in their hands, even if you have to retain some control because you're the only one with a computer, for example, with a device, you can still use them to differentiate learning as much as you can, and doing things like working on difficulties, for example. That's a simple thing you can do, but it's effective for all the reasons that we talked about. Marina is saying, sorry, I just caught a comment in the chat. Maybe when you talked about language reactor is when I used the word customized. You can because I said you can customize the settings. For example, I because I'm Italian, I used English, and my learners are Italian. I used English and Italian. That's what I meant. But there's loads of settings in there.
So there's a bit of learner training as well, showing them what's available and giving them the choice. Like some people like to use a dictionary to their own language. Others prefer, you know, English to English dictionary, or just to stay in context to guess the meanings.
And the thing is, learners will use that technology regardless. That's what I mean. You might as well train them to do things that are also conducive to learning. They have devices in their hands all the time anyway. So
okay, that's brilliant. And there's so many interesting questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of them. We're going to have to finish this session now. But you're back with us on Facebook. Do you remember what day it is that you're?
The 9th.
The 9th of August. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So check that out on our Facebook page, and Chiara will be back to answer any questions you have about this topic, and we're really excited to have you back again. So thank you. That's been wonderful. Thank you to Naomi, who's moderating on Facebook, and Melissa, who is here as well, moderating our chat. And we will be back for our last session today, which is the panel discussion in 15 minutes. So thanks so much, Chiara.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate you joining us and your participation in the chat, of course, and your engagement. Thank you.
It's been great. Thank you. Okay, see you all soon. See you later.
Bye, everyone.